Hello friends, welcome to my video. Today I am going to talk about query expression in C#. I will explain what query expression are and how we can create it. We will also learn important clauses for forming the query expression. Before we get started, just a quick reminder to subscribe my channel, hit the red button and don't forget to click on the little bell icon. That way you will be notified every time I upload a new video. Okay, without any further delay, let's get started. What's a query expression? Query expression in C#. Query expressions provide a language integrated syntax for queries, which is similar to relational query language like SQL queries. It can be used in any context in which a C# expression is valid, right? So what does it mean? It means that whenever we want to write SQL type of queries in C# language, we can use query expression. Very simple, right? Now we understood what query expression are. We will focus on how to write query expression, right? So before we jump creating the query expression, we first see its fundamental. So query expression is formed with two or more clauses like from clause, join clause, where clause, and so on, right? So keep in mind that query expression must begin with a from clause and must end with a select or group clause. In between, we could write optional clauses like where, order by, join, into, or let clauses. Okay, let's understand it with the help of example. If you see here, in this example, we have this number array where the number is 30, 45, 52, 40, 35, 38, 70, 85, 92, right? And in the second statement, we have written this query expression. And this query expression is for selecting numbers that are greater than 50. So if you see the query expression over here, I have written from number in numbers where number is greater than 50 and select number. So this query, what we have written as a part of the query expression, it just going to pick those numbers only that are greater than 50 and stored into this variable number greater than 50. Basically, I have written where keyword, right? So at the runtime, implicitly it will be capturing that particular data type value, right? Here, basically the return value would be in IEnumerable form. Okay, but we have written this where keyword and we have given this variable name as a number greater than 50. So number greater than 50 will be having all those numbers that are greater than 50. Okay, now I'm just going to print these numbers into the console window. For that, we have written this for each block, right? Int I in number greater than 50, and then we are writing console.writeLine so that the numbers that are greater than 50 are going to print it into this console window. And if you see the output here, numbers that are greater than 50, what are those number are 52, 70, 85, 92 from these list numbers array, right? Okay, so we have seen this simple example how to write the query expression. So here we are on Visual Studio. I have written the same program in this Visual Studio. Okay, so let me execute this. Let me click this start button. Okay, if you see numbers that are greater than 50, 52, 70, 85, 92, right? So these output got appear into this console window. That is the expected one, right? So it's working. Group clause in C# query expression. The group clause returns a sequence of I grouping T key T element objects that contains 0 or more items that match the key value for the group. Okay, let's understand it with the help of example. Let's suppose we have this string array, a string fruits, right? Where it contains all the fruit name like apple, banana, coconut, and so on, right? And in the next statement, I have written this query expression that basically just going to group based on the fruit's first character that matches with the other fruit's name, right? So I have written where fruit groups is equal to from fruit name in fruits order by fruit name 0 group fruit name by fruit name 0. So if you see here this group clause, we have written fruit name 0. So basically fruit name is nothing but a string, right? Or we can say in other words that is the character array. So I just want to fetch based on the first character of that fruit name, right? That's what I have written fruit name 0. So basically it is just going to work as a key, right? Because the grouping works with the sequence of I grouping like T key element. So here fruit name 0 will be treated as a key, right? And fruit name is basically nothing but the fruit name, right? Like apple, banana, coconut, and all those things, right? Okay, so now we group by and then we have stored this output into this fruit groups variable. And then we are iterating with the help of for each where fruit in fruit groups and then we are printing fruit name starts with a letter. If you remember, I said, like, this grouping works with the key value pair, right? So fruit dot key is nothing but the fruit name 0, right? So if we want to print those things, we need to use fruit dot key, because we have given variable over here in iteration, right? Var fruit. So fruit dot key, and then value, how we are going to get it? With the help of, we need to iterate fruit var value in fruit, because this value is nothing but the actual fruit name, and that we wanted to print it into this console window. That's why I have written console.write $value. You see the output, this expected output got appear into this output window, right? The fruit name start with a letter A. So A letter related start word, apple and apricots are there, right? So that's what it got printed. Similarly for B, only banana is there. Start with C, there are two fruits, coconut and cherry. Fruit name starts with letter M, that is the mango. Fruit name starts with the letter 0, not 0, O, it's nothing but the orange. Fruit name starts with the letter P, there are two fruits, papaya and pineapple, right? So the grouping is working. Based on that, we are getting the output, right? So same program, I have written this in Visual Studio. Let me execute this. The expected output got appear into this one window. So it's working, right? Into clause in C# query expression. Into clause enables the result of a join or group clause to serve as the source for additional query clauses in the same query expression. In simple words, it acts as a temporary identifier to store the results of a group, join, or select clause, right? Let's understand it with the help of example. Let's suppose we have this string array, a string fruits that contains apple, banana, coconut, cherry, papaya, and so on, right? In the next statement, we have written this query expression. This query expression is having this group by clause, and then we are just going to store the result of the grouping into this fruit group with the help of this into clause. So that's the use of the into, where we want to have one temporary identifier to store the result. So here in the result is nothing but the grouping result, right? That we have stored into this fruit group. In the next statement, I have used this fruit group identifier, right? So fruit group dot key, fruit group dot count, right? And store accordingly into these variables like fruit first letter and fruit count, right? So if you notice over here, fruit group dot key is nothing but the fruit name 0. Basically, it contains the first character of the fruit, right? In the next statement, I have written this for each loop. For each block, basically it just iterate the fruit group items, and then accordingly it is just going to print to the console window. So here if you notice, I have used this to select variable, right? Fruit first letter and the fruit count, right? So I have written fruit starts with fruit dot fruit first letter has fruit dot fruit count fruits in a group, right? If you see the output, it got printed accordingly, like fruit starts with A has only two fruits in a group, right? Similarly, B has only one fruit, and so on. So output got appeared based on our query expression, what we have fetched, and what we wanted to print it out, right, into this console window. So that's the beauty of into clause, where we have one temporary identifier to store the results, either it is coming from group, join, or the select clause. And in the same query expression, we can use it further. Like here we have used fruit group dot key, fruit group dot count, like that, right? So that's the into clause. So here we are on Visual Studio, where we have the same programs, right, for the into clause. So let me execute this. Okay, so output got appear into this console window, where we are seeing fruit start with A has two fruits in a group, fruit start with B has one fruits in a group, and so on, right? So expected output got appear into this console window. So this into clause is working perfectly fine. Join clause in C# query expression. Inner join clause in C# query expression. Okay, let's understand first what is join. The join clause helps us to retrieve data from different source sequences, and the elements in each source share some value that can be compared for equality. Okay, let's understand it with the help of example. Let's suppose we have two classes, department and a student. Department is having two attributes, department ID, department name. Similarly, a student has three attributes, a student ID, a student name, and department ID. If you notice, department ID is common in both the classes, right? So we can use department ID for the comparison of the equality, right? Now if you see right hand side, I have just inserted couple of the department into this list of department, right? So department ID is equal to 1 2, department name computer science and management study. Similarly, I have inserted couple of the student into this list of the students, right? A student ID 1 2 3, a student name Ravi James Krishna, department ID 1 2 and 0. Here if you notice department ID 0, it means it does not belong to any department, right? Okay, I'm just going to write the inner join. Okay, so if you notice the syntax over here, from a student in a students, join department in departments on a student dot department ID equals department dot department ID, right? So this is the way how we are just going to write the inner join, right? And the equality we are performing on the department ID, because the department ID is common in both the classes, right? And then we are just going to select the element like a student dot student name, department dot department name, and we are storing into this temporary variable a student name and department name. And in the next statement in for each block, I'm just going to print student name and the department name, right? So that's the way how we just write this inner join, right? Okay, now if you see the left outer join, I have kept the same example where we have this department and student class and department ID is the common, and we have inserted the same data for this department and the student, right? If you notice department ID is equal to 0. So what we are going to write over here, we are just going to fetch all the students whether it belongs to department or not. If it belongs to department, then department or department name is going to be printed. Otherwise just we are going to replace with NA. Okay, so let's understand how we just write this left outer join in C# language, right? So if you see here, from student in students, and we have written join department in departments on a student dot department ID equals department or department ID, and here I have kept into keyword and a student group. What it is doing over here, whatever the join result is coming, we are just going to store into this student group as a temporary identifier, right? And this temporary identifier we are going to use it further into this query expression, right? So if you see here, from department details in student group dot default if empty, so default if empty we have used as a method, and we are just going to use into the select clause over here, right? So if you notice here, I have written a student dot student name. That is fine, that we are just going to take this student name from the student, right? And here we are just going to check whether the department details is having any value or not. If it is null, then we are just going to print NA. If it is not null, then we are just going to fetch this department name from the department details, and then we are going to store into this department name variable. And in the next statement, I'm just going to print it with the help of console.writeLine statement, right? Like result.student name is from result.department name, department, right? So we are iterating this value and then we are printing into this console window. So that's the way how we are just going to write left outer join clause into this C# query expression. Okay, let's see the execution into this Visual Studio, right? Okay, so here we are on Visual Studio, right? So I have written the same programs over here. So here we have two classes, department and student. Department is having department ID, department name. Student is having three attributes, student ID, student name, and department ID. If you notice here, department ID is the common in both the classes, right? So I have inserted couple of the data into this list of department, and similarly for the students, right? So I'm just going to write over here inner join. So inner join, if you notice over here, I have written this from student or student in students, join department in departments on student or department ID equals department or department ID. So this is the way how we are just going to write this inner join, right? And then we have collected this student name from the student and the department name from the department, and then we have stored into this variable, and we have iterated using the for each loop block, and then we are printing all those things into this console window. A simple program to for demonstrating this inner join, right? Let me execute this book. So if you see this inner join result got printed into this console window. Ravi is from computer science department and James is from management studies department. The third Krishna got not printed, right? Because this department ID it belongs to 0, which is nothing but no department ID associated with Krishna, right? That's what this Krishna student ID is equal to 3 records got filtered into this inner join, because department ID 1 and 2 it matches with department ID 1 2. So these two records got considered, then it got printed as an output. So that's inner join. Let's see what is the outer join. Okay, so for left outer join, the same, the class we have department, a student, department ID is common in both the classes, right? We have inserted couple of the data into the department and a student. If you notice over here, department ID is equal to 0. So Krishna is does not belong to any department, right? Because department ID 0 does not exist. That's what we have just given. Department ID is equal to 0 as a default value, right? So if you see the left outer join, what we have done, we have written from a student in a students, join department in departments on a student or department ID equals department or department ID, right? So basically this is the way how we write inner join, right? But what we wanted to achieve here, we just write, I mean extend this inner join to convert into the left outer join. So how we are going to do? So whatever the result that we are receiving from this join, we are storing into this student group as a temporary identifier, right? Now, with the help of a student group, we are just going to verify student group dot default if default if empty, right? And we have written this from department details in the student group dot default empty. So it will be giving the department details, right? Now here what we are doing, we are taking this department details, verifying whether it is having null value or not, right? If it has null value, then we are just going to print NA, right? If department details is not null, then we are just going to fetch the department name from the department details, right? And then we have stored into this department name, and then we are printing into this console window, right? Console.writeLine result.student name is from result.department. So that's the way how we just write this left outer join, right? Now let me execute this program. Let me click the start button. Okay, if you see here, in last time when we have executed this inner join, right, only the Ravi and James records got printed. But here when we opted this left outer join, then all three results got printed: Ravi, James and Krishna. And because the Krishna is not attached to any department, that's what an A department got printed. Ravi belongs to computer science department, so it got printed. James belongs to management studies department, it got printed, right? So that's the way how we write this left outer join using these C# query expressions, right? Let clause and C# query expression. Let clause help us to store the result of an expression such as a method call in a new range variable. Let's understand it with the help of example. Let's suppose we have this string array names where we have names James Medina, John Abraham, Akanksha SV, right? Okay, in the next statement, I have written this query expression. From name in names, let first name is equal to name dot split 0, select first name. If you notice this let statement, I have written let first name is equal to name dot split 0. What it does, it basically splits the name with the help of blank space and take the first element of the splitted array and store it variable first name, which is defined by the let clause, right? So whenever we have to perform some sort of method call and wanted to store the result in a range variable, let clause can be opted. Anyway, we selected the new range variable first name in select clause as a part of query expression, right? In the next statement, we iterated the query first name results and print the implied first name into the console window, right? And that's what it is shown into the output at the right hand side, right? Now you must be thinking what the difference between let and into clause. Both appear same, right? There is a difference. Let me tell you what the difference is. Let injects the variable into the context or a scope, whereas into creates a new context or a scope. In simple words, we can say that let clause does not hide previous range variable, but into clause hides that. If you notice in this statement, we have written from name in names. Name is nothing but the previous range variable. If you are going to use let, we can use name also into the select clause if you want to. But if you use this into clause, right, then name range variable is not visible. Basically, it got hidden when we use this into clause. So that's the difference between let and into. clause in CSAP query expression, right? Okay, that brings me to end of my session. If you like this video, hit the like button, share it with your friends and colleagues, subscribe to my channel if you haven't done already. Thank you. See you in next video.